Welcome to the Life Academy podcast.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another podcast on Life Academy in our series, A Christian Perspective. I'm Pastor Doug Pratt, here to talk with you about an issue that is threatening to badly divide and alienate our nation, a trend that has been growing in recent years. We will be discussing when tolerance becomes coercion. In these next few moments, I will offer thoughts for your consideration. As with all these podcasts, I want to make it clear that I am offering a Christian perspective, not necessarily the only one. I speak for myself alone, but I do so with the purpose of inviting and encouraging reflection on your part, in order that we might not just be, in the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by the wind of our current culture. The Bible's goal for disciples of Christ is to be mature in our thinking and acting, to do all in harmony with His Word and His will. During my years of growing up and early adulthood, a strong and consistent theme was voiced across American society: the need for tolerance. There are several reasons why this plea resonated with me and why tolerance became a nearly universal, recognized fundamental virtue for modern life. The core reason is that it is consistent with biblical teachings. The Christian faith was born into a world that was characterized by extreme intolerance. People of different races and nations hated and warred with each other. Society was stratified into the haves and have-nots, and the totalitarian government of the dominant empire enforced its own views without dissent. But the new ethic of Christ taught that all individuals mattered, and that each individual was precious and worthy of respect and equal treatment. Although, in the 2 millennia since that radical concept was proposed, even professing Christians have not always followed it, nevertheless, it is the undeniable biblical standard. In addition, the gospel of Christ assumes the free will of all people. Only those who freely choose to believe are truly redeemed and included in the church. God does not have grandchildren, only children. If faith is forced upon a person or a group, it is not real faith, any more than love demanded at the end of a sword or gun would really be love. And of great relevance for the modern world, with the incredible movement of people around the globe, nearly every country, especially one as open and free as the United States, has become a true melting pot of different races, customs, and viewpoints. If our society is going to work, we have to be able to tolerate people who are different than we are. America's founding documents have set the high bar, proclaiming that all are created equal. As a nation of immigrants, although at times newcomers were not warmly welcomed, succeeding generations have been successfully assimilated, and tolerance has become a firm foundation for our nation's laws. But virtues are never static and secure among imperfect and sinful human beings and societies. And in the past couple decades, we have seen an alarming shift. In many venues, tolerance is being replaced by coercion. Here is a common pattern. When a group perceives itself to be a minority or without power, its self-interest leads it to appeal for tolerance. But ironically, when those same people gain power or become a majority, they tend to forget what it felt like to be on the other side and can become coercive of their own preferences against others. Why does this happen? The simple explanation is that we are all sinners, and that we can be misled by our human nature and the temptations of the devil into being manipulated by the desire for power over others. Power is indeed seductive. It feels good to be able to force others to do what we want. The love of power ultimately springs from pride, the very first and original sin. In our prideful selfishness, we assume that we are right and others wrong, that our people are the best and others are inferior, that the way we think and act is correct and everyone should be made to conform to our preferences. If tolerance is essential to a society functioning in a healthy way, coercion is a deadly cancer that threatens it. As I have observed the spirit of intolerance and coercion spreading in the last few decades, it strikes me as especially hypocritical and tragic in 4 areas of our common life. In all of these, tolerance should be preeminent. But sinful and short-sighted people have fallen into the trap of acting coercively. Consider the disastrous consequences in these 4 dimensions: the church, education, journalism, and science. First, to my mind, the most ironic and tragic, the church. The mainline Protestant churches of America have been largely ripped apart and are in dramatic decline because a group of progressives has turned its back on the open spirit of tolerance it inherited from its spiritual predecessors and is attempting to enforce a theological and ideological uniformity. The great leaders of the Protestant Reformation of 500 years ago proclaimed that their threefold motto was, in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty, that is, liberty of conscience; and in all things, charity. That is no longer the case in the United Methodist Church, where a minority of progressives recently gained control and have forced pastors and congregations to either adopt a decidedly woke agenda or leave, usually at significant financial sacrifice. The Presbyterian Church, of which I am a part, this very summer of 2024, is dealing with a similar threat. How ironic that the faith that brought the virtue of tolerance into the world is now, due to the obsessive and extreme ideology of a few, becoming an example of intolerance. Second, look at how the move to coercion has compromised the original purpose and the stated goals of education, especially at the college level. When I was in school, campuses were conceived to be places where freedom of speech, open debate, and the respectful consideration of all ideas were protected. The progressives of the 1960s, who felt like minorities at that time, campaigned vigorously for such freedoms. Now many of them are tenured professors and administrators, and in numerous sad examples, they have hypocritically shifted to a refusal to allow any view to be advocated on their campuses but their own. Third, consider the hypocrisy of much of America's contemporary news media. Journalism's highest ideal has always been the unbiased pursuit of truth. Reporters and editors envision their profession as a noble servant of the public's need to know the facts, especially in a democracy where national issues and priorities need to be dealt with in open and accurately informed debate. The gradual distortion of many of our leading journalistic outlets, from even-handed and accurate presentations of the facts to partisan advocacy, and even the stifling or silencing of information that might go against the preferred narrative of the company, has resulted in a great loss of credibility. The openly partisan Washington Post, now losing readership at an alarming rate, has the ironic slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness." The New York Times, which has famously twisted its reporting and stifled inconvenient facts, and has been called out by former editors and reporters, continues to claim all the news that's fit to print. And the fourth area of hypocritical coercion, science. While the modern scientific method has had as its cornerstone the open consideration of all evidence at all times in the pursuit of truths about the natural world, even some of our leading scientists have succumbed to the temptation to coercion against any who dare to disagree with them. The terrible consequences of the botched response to the virus COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021, perpetrated by power-hungry and coercive government officials, but with the backing of the public health bureaucracy, are now being exposed. The discredited Dr. Anthony Fauci not only lied frequently to the nation, but he and Dr. Francis Collins of the National Institutes of Health and others attempted to stifle all views of physicians and researchers that dissented from their own. The coercive forces during the pandemic, which resulted in unreasonable lockdowns and masking and vaccine requirements, did great damage to school children, to businesses and individual careers, and to the economy as a whole. Replacing tolerance with coercion is cancerous. It will take a very long time for public health officials to regain credibility. How do we respond as individual Christians in a society where controlling forces are pressuring us? Well, I will close by offering two thoughts. First, we cannot use the same tactics that others seek to employ against us because those tactics are destructive to all who use them. So-called cancel culture, which is a form of coercion, attempts to silence or destroy those who dare to disagree with the group that is in power. It is tempting to want to do likewise, but this only fuels the dysfunctional fire. The far left of the progressives in America have used violence to try to impose their will. We witnessed violent protests in Washington and other places when Donald Trump was inaugurated in January 2017. We witnessed violent protests and riots in Minneapolis and many other cities when George Floyd died in 2020. We have recently witnessed chaotic protests and building seizures on college campuses in support of Hamas. These are destructive of American civil society. But when conservatives participated in a violent riot at the U.S. Capitol in January 2021, they harmed their cause significantly. Adopting the tactics of their political and ideological opponents only hurt their cause and corrupted them. Conservatives are, after all, by definition, people who want to conserve, not destroy, that which is right and good. That's why violence and other coercive acts by them are so hypocritical. My second word of counsel to Christians who find themselves in an environment where their faith and values are not tolerated and where they are recipients of coercive pressure is to claim the freedom to withdraw. I think we need to develop a theology of being fired, or quitting, or transferring schools, or refusing to patronize businesses. The church of the first century, our spiritual forefathers, faced an extremely coercive secular society, and they had a theology of martyrdom. They supported and encouraged one another in holding on to their faith and their principles, even in their case, to the point of the sword. Rarely are we in America, so far at least, at such an extreme. But a soft totalitarianism has definitely emerged in some places, in some schools, some workplaces, some communities. And when we are not able to reasonably and graciously persuade our opponents to return to tolerance, it's important that we take our stand and not give in or compromise what we hold dear. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who showed us that in the name of Christ, it was right to refuse to give in to unjust laws and coercion, and that in being willing to pay the price in the short term, we could bring about long-term change. This is Doug Pratt. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Life Academy and a Christian Perspective.
Thank you for joining us for this Life Academy episode. We encourage you to subscribe. And if you enjoy our podcast, please share it with your friends and family.